I pull off Highway 2 and into the Hungry Horse Ranger Station just as the summer storm clouds split open above me. A curtain of rain dumps down over the tiny town of Hungry Horse. The cluster of long, low buildings that make up the ranger station sits not far off the highway. As I park next to a Forest Service vehicle, I can see the gas station across the street in my rearview mirror. But I know northern Montana well, and I know that the wilderness takes over not far outside these little towns that humans have erected for themselves. Once you leave the power grid and water and shelter behind, there are so many ways things can go wrong for you. Of course, that's why I'm here at all. That's why I've been called up to Montana in the middle of July, away from my cozy cabin in the Smoky Mountains. This is what I do. Leaving everything but my phone and wallet in the car, I won't need my gear until later. I step out and turn my face up to the rain for a moment. The cool water runs across my bald scalp and gathers in my bushy brown-red beard. It pools against my closed eyelids and tries to break the seal I've made with my lips. I wonder if the Loudark family is being rained on wherever they are in the wild mountains that sprout up from Montana dirt, like the jagged spines of ancient and massive creatures that once ruled the earth. I did my research on the plane ride up, looking at their social media pictures, committing the faces of the 4 missing people to memory. Now, as I revel in the cool Montana rain, I picture them huddled together, lost, near to starving, maybe injured. I picture them miserable but alive. It's the best-case scenario. I'm being optimistic. I've been doing this for long enough to know that when people have been missing for as long as the Loudark family has, I'm more likely than not to find them dead, or to not find them at all. There is no national database of people who've gone missing in national parks or forests, and certainly no database of those who have never been found. But I've come up with an estimate after researching and talking to people and working cases where no one was ever found. I put the number at over 1,000 since the parks were founded. 1,000 people who walked off into one of America's parks or forests and were never seen again, gone without a trace. Of course, they left friends and family members behind. Those people have a tendency to hold on to hope. At first, that hope wraps itself around the notion that the missing will come out, a little beat up, but alive. Soon, that hope dwindles and changes and wraps itself around the next best thing, recovering the body, solving the mystery, gaining some closure. And when closure doesn't come, well, that hope has a tendency to turn foul. That hope can morph into something so dark and mournful that it's nearly impossible to get rid of it. They just have to live with it for the rest of their lives, feeling it eating away at them, haunting them, the unexplainable teasing them day in, day out. I know how that feels because I've gone through all the stages myself. That dark, mournful thing lives in me now. But I have a way to keep it at bay. I can bring closure to others like me. And that's what I aim to do with the Loudark family. After a moment of getting my mind right, I straighten my head, the rain sluicing off and gathering in my beard as I step under the awning at the front door of the main office. I drag a hand down my face and then run my fingers through my beard, shaking my hands to clear them of moisture. Then I step inside. "Mr. Cole," a young forest ranger says. He's maybe 25, with a thick and youthful corn-fed face. His bright green eyes shine from under the flat brim of his ranger hat. He wears the standard summer uniform, khaki shirt with dark green pants. His nameplate reads Monroe. "I'm Clay Cole," I say. "Got a meeting with someone named Hoover." Yes, I know who you are, sir," Monroe says. "I'm Leonard Monroe." We shake hands. He hangs on for a little too long, and I can sense he wants to say something. "Let's get this done," I say. "There's 4 people who need our help." That snaps Monroe out of it. "Yeah, of course," he says. "This way." I follow him out of the lobby, and down a wood-paneled hallway. Hoover's the one who's been in charge of this? I ask as we walk. Yeah, that's right, Monroe says. He leads me to a small conference room that contains a man and a woman, both dressed in uniforms similar to Monroe's. They have a map tacked up on the wall, 2 laptops open on the table, and a couple of coffee cups sitting nearby. There's also a thin manila folder sitting next to one of the laptops. The man and woman are both studying the map as we walk into the room. The woman is in her 40s, with prematurely white hair and a solid build. The man is about the same age, but he's softer around the middle, and he looks like he wouldn't survive a week in the woods without a backpack full of supplies. They both turn and look at me. Mr. Cole, the man says. I move up to the map and start studying it. They've marked the place where the Loudark family entered the Great Bear Wilderness area and their stated destination. It looks like they've also clearly labeled other possible trails that branch off from the one the Loudarks purportedly took. How are you, Clay? The woman asks. Her name is Jewel Brennan, and we've crossed paths before. Great, I say. You two know each other? The man asks. We've met, I say. You must be Hoover. In my peripheral vision, I see Hoover extend a hand to shake, but I ignore it. A moment of awkward silence passes, the tension in the room mounting as I continue studying the map. Okay, I say finally. Is this all you have for me? Because if so, you're already wasting my time. Jesus, Clay, Brennan says under her breath. What the hell does that mean? Hoover asks. We're extending a courtesy here. We rarely allow outsiders to help us in this way. I turn to Hoover and stare into his pale blue eyes. I'm not about to waste any more time than you already have. I need to get on the trail. So unless you have something else I need to know, other than what you could have told me over the phone, I'm getting back on the road. As he averts his eyes, I see the shame in them. He knows he messed up. At least, that's something. If he didn't know what he did wrong, he would have been a lost cause. Just tell me one thing, I say. Why didn't you send someone up there the moment you heard they weren't on schedule? We didn't have the records, Hoover mutters, still looking at the floor. I had no one to send. Bullshit. If you really tried, you could have had someone on that trail the next fucking day. I turn to Brennan. Would you have gone if he asked you? Brennan begs me with her eyes to drop it, but I can't. Listen, you don't know the whole... Would you or wouldn't you? I ask. Brennan sighs. You know I would have. And where were you? Bozeman, she says. A lot fucking closer than the Smoky Goddamn Mountains, I say, turning back to Hoover. Now, please tell me you already have someone up there ahead of me. Hoover steps away from the map and goes over to the manila folder on the table. That's why I wanted to talk to you in person, he says, picking the folder up. I sent 2 rangers up there yesterday. They each had GPS monitors and satellite phones because there's no service up there. Okay, good, I say. And what do they have to say so far? Nothing, Hoover says, looking me in the eye again. They've missed their last 2 check-ins, and their GPS monitors stopped transmitting last night. What are you suggesting? I ask. That there's a serial killer up there? All I'm saying is that we've had other people go missing in that area before the Loudarks and my 2 rangers, Hoover says. When? The latest ones were in 2004. 2 men disappeared, Hoover says. We never found any trace of them. Before that, it was 1983. Again, 2 men, no trace. That would have to be a patient, and by this point, pretty old serial killer, I say. I never said it was a serial killer, Hoover snaps. You said that. I'm just telling you what I know. Well, I've hunted down 2 serial killers operating in parks and wilderness areas. I'm sure there are others we don't know about. I'm not ruling it out, but I also wouldn't operate on that assumption. How competent are your men? I ask. The 2 you sent up there. Extremely, Hoover says. Okay, give me the information on the other missing people. I'll review it on the way. I turn and point to the kid Monroe. You're going to drive me to the trailhead. No, Hoover says. I will. I'm going with you. I exhale a sharp laugh. No fucking way. Not happening. You don't have a choice, Hoover says, getting more animated now. I turn back to face the middle-aged man. I can just leave you behind on the trail. By the looks of you, it wouldn't be so hard. This is not optional, Hoover says. Guys, please, we're wasting time, Brennan says. I'd rather take the kid with me, I say, hooking a thumb at the young man. Hoover opens his mouth to answer, then he pauses, seeming to consider. Okay, fine. Take Monroe with you. That wasn't a serious suggestion, I say. I was just making a point. Well, you're not going alone, Hoover says. That's for damn sure. What about you? I ask, turning to Brennan. I know you're capable, but I don't know jack about these two. Why don't you come with me? Brennan shakes her head and points at her right knee. I've got patellar tendonitis. I'm going to need surgery to fix it. But you still would have gone up there right away if he'd asked, right? I say. Brennan nods her head. Why do you think I didn't ask? Hoover says. Sighing, I look over at the kid again. What's the farthest you've ever hiked in a day? About 12 miles, he says. We're likely to do 16 today if we don't find them before Elk Lake. Can you handle that? Monroe's eyes light up. Yes, sir. How long to get your stuff together? 5 minutes, he says. I always have a pack ready to go. Well, let's go, I say. I'll transfer my stuff to your vehicle. You're driving. Yes, sir, Monroe says again, turning and heading out of the conference room like a little kid on Christmas. A ray of brilliant sunshine breaks through the clouds as we drive down Highway 2. I sit in the front while Monroe drives. Brennan and Hoover sit in the back of the Forest Ranger SUV. Hoover insisted they come along, and I couldn't dissuade him. Maybe as some sort of subtle and petty payback, he refused to give me the manila folder, instead insisting on reading the contents to me as we drive. He tells me about the other disappearances in the area and gives me a ballpark estimate of how many people take that particular trail every year. Like all national park and national forest disappearances, the number of people who visit compared to the number of people who go missing is quite the disparity. The people who go missing are a tiny percentage of people who visit, and an even smaller percentage are never found or heard from again. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't go after the ones who go missing. Of course it doesn't. That would be no way to run a society. Still, leads can dry up, clues can lead to dead ends, and remains can eventually be consumed by the forest. And when that happens, resources are often shifted to newer, warmer cases. It's the sad truth of all investigations like this. I'm hoping that this one will be resolved before it comes to that. At the very least, I want to find the remains of these people so we can piece together what happened for their friends and loved ones. Here's the thing, though, Hoover says after telling me about the 1983 and 2004 disappearances. Most people just take the trail up to Elk Lake and then turn around. Maybe they camp out up there for a few days, explore a bit, and then come down. But all the disappearances have one thing in common. They were headed beyond Elk Lake, to Vinegar Mountain. Surely they can't be the only ones, I say. How many people go up to Vinegar Mountain a year by that route? Not many, Hoover says, picking up his phone. It's by permit only to go up there, and we ask everyone to register their path and destination. But of course, some people slip through. According to my records, there have only been around 3 dozen people per year to register for that particular hike to Vinegar Mountain, give or take a few. I nod. Okay, so it's a rough hike beyond Elk Lake? Yes, it's considered hard. Have any of you ever done it before? Not to Vinegar, Hoover says. We've all been up to Elk Lake, though. We continue discussing the disappearances as we close in on the trailhead. Hoover gives me a map marked with the last known location of his 2 missing rangers, and I give him the information to look up my Garmin GPS tracker so he can track our progress. He already has the information on Monroe's tracker. He also tells me there's nowhere to land a helicopter up there. When I first heard about the Loudarks being late back from their trip, I sent a helicopter up to look for them. Obviously, they didn't find anything. But I'll have one ready to go as soon as we hear from you on the sat phone. Monroe guides the SUV off the highway and onto a dirt road. We drive for about a mile before we hit the trailhead. July in this part of Montana is hot and dry. The occasional showers hardly help that. And it doesn't look like the recent rain reached this area at all. The vehicle kicks up a cloud of dust on the dirt road. There's only one other vehicle in the small parking area hemmed in by pine trees, and that's the van that belongs to the Loudarks. Hoover tells me he already searched it himself, but found nothing of interest inside. He left it just in case the Loudarks came back without anyone knowing. But since the van is still here, the Loudark family is still out there somewhere, along with 2 forest rangers. And that fact makes me really uneasy. When 2 rangers go missing in the woods, it doesn't mean anything good. Monroe and I get our gear ready, boots kicking up dust. Brennan and Hoover stand nearby, looking like 2 worried parents sending their kids off for the first time. I holster my Colt Python on my right hip. It's a .357 revolver with a 4 1/4-inch barrel and 6 rounds, but it's only a backup. I also have my Remington 700 rifle in .30-06. It holds 5 rounds. I have a sleeve on the stock with 5 more, plus backup rounds for both weapons in my pack. Otherwise, I travel light. Food and water, a jet boil, and 2 small canisters of fuel. A water filter, a tent, and a sleeping bag. A couple of tools for chopping wood and making fire. And, of course, a first aid kit. My pack is much smaller and lighter than Monroe's, which doesn't surprise me. As a man in his late 40s, I don't have the pure youthful energy that Monroe has. Plus, I've been doing this for long enough to know what I do and don't need. I know my capabilities, and I know how I can survive in these mountains for weeks with minimal supplies if it comes down to it. Once we have our packs on and we're ready to go, we exchange a few final words with Hoover and Brennan before hitting the trail. It's nearly 9 o'clock in the morning, and we have a long way to go. So I set the pace, moving quickly, listening to Monroe huff behind me as he tries to keep up. I'm hoping his youthful energy will make up for his lack of fitness, but I'm not optimistic. And I'll leave his ass behind if it comes down to it. We stop for a rest on a ridge overlooking Elk Lake in the early afternoon. We've seen no signs of any other people out here. From the ridge, I can see for a couple of miles, nothing but towering trees, craggy mountains, and undergrowth. I stand, with my pack still on, binoculars in hand, scanning the area around Elk Lake. The route that the Loudarks would have taken if they wanted to go directly to Vinegar Mountain would have bypassed Elk Lake. But we can't assume that. They might have decided to stop at Elk Lake for lunch, or even to camp out for the night. But I see no sign of anyone, not from up here. Behind me, Monroe sits against a fallen tree, huffing and puffing and gulping down water from his Nalgene. After a few minutes of scanning with the binoculars, I grab some homemade beef jerky out of a side pocket on my pack and stick a strip in my mouth. I offer one to Monroe, and he takes it, face red with effort and slick with perspiration. The clouds have cleared out, leaving the sky a brilliant blue and allowing the sun to heat us up. "You gonna be all right?" I ask him. "I generally think I'm pretty fit," Monroe says, chewing the jerky. "But man, where do you get the energy?" "When you've been doing this for as long as I have, your body gets used to it." Monroe is about to answer when his eyes catch on something behind me. "Holy shit," he says. "There's someone down there." I turn around and look toward Elk Lake, my heart lurching in my chest as I see a tiny figure at the opposite edge of the lake. I bring the binoculars up and peer at the person. It's a man, dressed in a ranger's uniform, but he doesn't have a pack on. "What is he doing?" Monroe says, stepping up beside me and bringing his own binoculars up to his eyes. I have no answer. I'm paying attention to the man's face. There's something wrong with it, but even with the binoculars, I can't tell exactly what. His features are blurred with distance, but it looks like he's grinning. "Is he smiling?" Monroe asks. He might be, but I don't say anything. I just watch as the man steps into the lake. I let my binoculars hang from their strap and unsling my rifle. I raise it and look through the scope, seeing that the man is now up to his knees in the water. I realize he's not smiling. Not really. Something like hooks attached to ropes snag the corners of his mouth, pulling his lips up to approximate a smile. I can't see how the lines that are attached to the hooks are secured at the back of his head. I'm not even sure if what I'm seeing is accurate at this distance, but I keep watching as he walks forward, the water coming up to his thighs, then his waist, then his chest. And then he disappears beneath the surface. "What the hell?" Monroe asks. "Leave your pack," I say, starting down the trail at a run. It takes me several minutes to reach the lake, and there's no sign that the man has come up for air in that time. At the edge of the water, I dump my supplies onto the ground, remove my revolver and holster, yank off my boots, and jump into the lake. The water is shockingly cold, and it snaps my breath away for a moment. Then I'm diving under and looking around the murky water for any sign of the man. I search until my breath runs out, surfacing to pull oxygen into my lungs before diving again. I do this 3 times, spending several minutes searching for the man and seeing no sign of him. Finally, I surface and look toward the shore for Monroe. My stomach turns, seeing only my pack and supplies at the shore, no Monroe. I spin around in the water, searching 360 degrees around, seeing no sign of the man. I swim to the shore and get out of the lake, cold water sluicing off me and the mountain breeze making me shiver. "Monroe!" I shout, heading for my backpack to retrieve the satellite phone. I didn't bother looking back when I first started running down to the lake, but I heard him following me as I ran down. Now, there's no sign of him. I pull the phone out of the bag and hit the power button, setting it down on my backpack while it powers up. The only clear part around the lake is where I left my supplies, but the ground is uneven and rocky right up to the shore. The rest of the lake is surrounded by trees, which I peer into, searching for any sign of Monroe. All the while, the worst thing I've been worried about is a serial killer operating up here. But now, with what I've just seen, my mind is reeling. What could make a man walk into a lake and drown himself like that? And what about those hooks through his mouth? Were they hooks at all? Or was that my imagination? I call for Monroe again, running around the edge of the lake, peering into the trees. The trail skirts a sliver of land between the trees and the shore, so I take it, nearly tripping on the rocky ground, stubbing my toes several times since I took my boots off before jumping into the lake. It's a small body of water, so it doesn't take me long to reach the other side. I follow the trail into the woods, and as I round a bend, I spot Monroe standing ahead on the trail, staring off to the right into the woods. Although he's side on to me, I can see that he's terrified. "Monroe?" I ask. He doesn't answer or look at me. His head remains tilted up, as if he's looking into the branches of an off-trail tree. But his arm comes up, and he points into the woods. Slowly, heart clanging in my chest, I walk toward the young man. Getting closer, I look into the woods, gazing to where he's pointing. I step on a sharp rock just as I see what has captured his attention so thoroughly. And suddenly, the sharp rock stabbing into my foot is barely a concern, because what I see in the tree should be impossible. It's something out of a disturbed individual's imagination, belonging in a movie or in the pages of a novel. It does not belong in real life. "Do you see it?" Monroe asks in a whisper. "Yes," I say, voice even lower than Monroe's. "Oh, Jesus," Monroe says. "I think that's Easley." Then he turns and vomits his water and beef jerky onto the trail. The man Monroe says is Easley no longer resembles a man in any meaningful sense. He's in a tree, not just on it, but in it. Or rather, it's in him. It looks as if the tree grew through him. The trunk extends through his torso, as if it grew through his back and sprouted out his chest. His arms and legs are spread, twisted branches impaling him twice in each limb. His mouth is open in a perpetual silent scream, a sprouting branch extending from his maw. But the strange thing is the blood. There's blood near every hole in his body. some of it even dripping slowly from the branches. Even if it were possible for a tree to grow through a man, it wouldn't be possible in 24 hours, and it certainly wouldn't leave fresh blood. As I struggle to comprehend what I'm seeing, I think of how it would be possible to get him up there like that. Could a person do that to him? I don't see how. Maybe a team of people, but even then, the logistics boggle the mind. I tear my eyes away from the dead ranger as something moves, snapping branches in the woods far beyond the body. Automatically, my eyes scan the trees. Millions of years of predator spotting evolution doing its thing, looking for a break in the patterns. But whatever or whoever is causing the noise is too far back, hidden behind an opaque curtain of foliage and trunks. My mind reels. The fight-or-flight process moves on, unable to identify a threat, and therefore unable to assess it. Fight is not an option. It's time for flight. I grab Monroe by the arm and yank him down the trail, back toward the lake, back toward my rifle and my revolver. The noise in the woods increases, seeming to follow us on a parallel path through the trees, branches snapping and bushes rustling. We get to the edge of the lake, and I expect the noise to increase again as it follows us, but it suddenly stops, leaving only the sound of our rasping breath and thudding footsteps. I fix my eyes on my pack and supplies, seeing that my rifle and revolver are still where I left them. But something's wrong. Something's missing. Items have been pulled out of my pack and strewn along the ground. As I reach the pack, I grab the rifle and turn back the way we came, raising it and peering through the scope, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. "We need to get out of here," Monroe says, voice quivering. "You left your pack up on the ridge?" I ask, still scanning with my rifle. "Yeah, like you said." "Do me a favor and find my sat phone, would you? Should be right here somewhere." I'm not ready to let the rifle down just yet. I'm shivering, but it's not from the cold this time. Monroe rummages around while I keep watch. After a minute, he says, "I don't see a phone." "Keep watch and tell me if you see anything," I say, lowering the rifle and taking my turn looking for the sat phone. It doesn't take me long to realize it's gone. So is my GPS. I stuff everything back in my pack, clip my holster back on my belt, and pull my boots back on over still wet socks. "Let's go," I say, swinging the pack onto my back. Monroe moves quickly ahead of me, but I take my time, glancing back to check our six every few steps. I see that Monroe's backpack has been tampered with when we reach the ridge. "You've got to be kidding me," he says, kneeling and looking for his phone. I already know it's gone, and I have a feeling something similar happened to the two now dead rangers. If we're not careful, we'll be joining them in the afterlife soon. "Get your pack on," I tell him. "We're hiking out now." He doesn't argue, and we're hiking back toward the trailhead 2 minutes later. We haven't gone more than 100 yards when a faint scream comes floating to me on the wind. I stop walking, clutching my rifle tighter, knowing this can't be good. Up ahead, Monroe stops too and looks over his shoulder. He seems to have aged 10 years in the last 20 minutes. "Did you hear that?" I ask him. "Please, Mr. Cole, let's just go." The scream comes again. It's a young person's scream, a girl's scream, and she's calling for help. I turn around and look toward the ridge that overlooks the lake. Taking a step in that direction churns my stomach, but I force myself to keep moving. Every instinct tells me to turn back around and get to civilization as soon as I can. But there's one thing that holds me back, and that's the memory of my wife as she left our campsite that morning 20 years ago. It was the last time I ever saw her. I had come down with something and was under the weather right in the middle of our 1-week hiking trip in the Colorado Rockies. She was going to do a quick day hike. I insisted she go, even though she said she wanted to stick around the camp and keep me company. So she capitulated and left that morning, never to return again. We found nothing of hers at all, not even a boot or hat or a decomposed skeleton. Not a trace in 20 years. That memory is why I forced myself to continue toward the ridge. It's the only reason. And as I crest the ridge, I see a young woman running up the trail from Elk Lake. I raise my binoculars to get a better view of her. It's Cyril Loudark, the 18-year-old daughter.
Stay there.
I call to Monroe, who stands where I left him.
What is it?
He asks, unable to see over the ridge.
It's the girl, Cyril,
I say, pulling my pack off. I sling my rifle across my chest and pull my python out, keeping the revolver pointed at the ground as I scan the area around the running girl. She's no longer screaming, but she's running fast. And now that she's closer, I can see she's pretty beat up. Her expensive-looking hiking getup, water-resistant pants and a similar shirt, have slashes through them, exposing shallow cuts on the skin underneath. Her brown hair is in frazzled braids that bounce off her back as she springs up the trail. I wave her toward me, still keeping my eyes peeled for any pursuers. Something about this is wrong, I think. No, everything about this is wrong. I feel like 1,000 pairs of eyes are watching me from the woods all around. The young woman slows as she reaches me, more out of exhaustion than relief. She stumbles into me, and I grab her to keep her from falling.
Please,
She says, pointing behind her.
please, you have to help them.
Where are they? I ask.
What happened? There's a creature.
She gasps, eyes wild. A creature? What do you mean? She shakes her head.
They're still alive.
Where are they?
A cave on the mountain. Please, we have to go get them.
Monroe comes up behind us, but he just stares at the girl, saying nothing. I turn to him. You need to get her out of here. I'm going after her family.
No!
Cyril shouts.
No! You'll never find them without me. I have to show you.
I think about our missing sat phones and GPS trackers. The girl doesn't know what she's saying. Despite what I've seen in the woods near the lake, I can't accept that there's some demented creature out here. It has to be a man. Maybe he's wearing an outfit to scare her. A man took our GPS trackers and sat phones. A man is behind this. Is he messing with us? Is this a sick game? I scan the trees near the lake. He knows we're here. He's probably watching us right now. Everything about this feels wrong, but I have no choice. I have to go find the rest of the family.
What should we do?
Monroe asks.
We're going to get her cleaned up and checked for injuries. Then I'll get her to draw me a map. No!
Cyril says again.
I'm okay. I can show you the way. But we need to go before he kills them. If he gets back and finds me gone, he'll kill them all.
Monroe and I share a look.
Okay,
I say.
you hike out. Drop whatever you don't need out of your pack and move as fast as you can. You won't get out before dark, but you need to keep going. Get law enforcement up here as quick as you can. You get me? You want me to leave you?
Monroe asks.
That's what I'm saying. Now go. You're losing light.
Cyril and I reach the point on the trail where the ranger in the tree is visible, but we continue past the body without stopping. I glance at it, but I don't call attention to it. If Cyril hasn't seen it, she doesn't need to now. I need her calm as I can get her anyway. She munches on a protein bar I gave her, walking quickly ahead of me. I have my pack on again, my revolver holstered, and my Remington in my hands, ready to go. I want to ask Cyril more questions about the man holding her family captive, but it's better if we're as quiet as possible while we move through the woods. Back on the ridge, I asked her if the man had guns. She said it wasn't a man. She said it was a creature, and that it had taken over her parents. I dropped it, refusing to give into her psychosis. I'll just have to go in blind. I've done it before. Cyril promised to tell me when we were getting close, so I could scout the area and maybe come at the cave from some direction with plenty of cover. When I asked her if we would get there before sunset, she said she thought we would. As we came to a small clearing, I look up at the sky and see that the sun will be down in 2 hours, give or take. We keep going, plodding along, not speaking. After another mile or so, Cyril turns and tells me she needs to rest. You can't keep going? I ask. Without responding, Cyril turns her back on me, doubles over, and retches. Black goop comes out of her mouth and splatters on the trail at her feet. At first, I think it's just the protein bar coming back up from an upset stomach. But as she pukes again, I catch a glimpse of what looks to be squirming roots dangling from her mouth. She suddenly straightens up, her back to me, spine stiff and arms rigid at her sides.
Are you okay?
I ask, the image of those writhing roots hanging from her mouth still haunting me, making me think twice about approaching her. Two thin roots whip around from either side of her face, moving past her ears and digging into the curve at the back of her head where her skull meets her spine. The tendrils dig around under her skin for a moment before they stop moving and go taut. Cyril turns around to face me, and I see that the roots are coming out of her mouth, pulling the corners of her lips up and giving her an artificial grin like the one I saw on the ranger's face before he went into the lake.
What the hell?
I whisper, stepping back and raising the rifle to my shoulder. Cyril steps toward me.
Don't!
I say.
Stay back!
She doesn't listen. She steps closer. I put my finger on the trigger, but I already know I won't be able to pull it. I have no idea what's happening here, but I know I can't shoot this young woman any more than I could shoot my own wife if she was the one standing here. So I do the next best thing. I turn and run. I haven't made it 4 steps when the sound of branches snapping erupts from the woods to my left. I glance that way and see a large, dark creature moving through the woods on all 4s. It's far enough in that I can't tell what it is, only that it's fast and powerful. As I round a bend in the trail, I hear the creature burst out of the woods, heavy footfalls thudding on the trail behind me. I still have my pack on, so I quickly ditch it as I run, hoping it will slow whatever is coming after me. It's no use. The thing is getting closer. I have to turn and fight. If I keep running, I'm dead. I come to a halting stop on the trail, spinning around to see a massive grizzly bear bounding toward me. But it's not just any grizzly bear. It has roots sprouting from its hide here and there, brown leaves sticking up from them. A network of roots cover its face, branching out from the eyes and mouth, revealing its large, sharp teeth. The first shot I fire hits the bear in the chest as it's in mid-run, but it doesn't even slow the creature down. It's only 15 yards away now and closing fast. I jack the bolt back, ejecting the spent chamber and loading another round. The second shot hits it in a foreleg, blasting a large chunk away. Still, the bear doesn't slow. Backpedaling, I drop the rifle and pull out my .357 Python. I take aim and fire. The revolver kicks in my hands and the top of the bear's skull flies off. Before I can get another shot off, I trip over a rock and go sprawling onto my back. Then the bear is on top of me, rearing up, roaring, and swinging a massive paw down toward my face. The last thing I feel before losing consciousness is the breathtaking sensation of its claws tearing into my flesh. I feel like my head is on fire. Waking up is like stumbling out of a numb nightmare and into hell. I quickly realize I'm standing up. Well, that's not exactly right. I'm being held up against a craggy cave wall by a man I recognize from photos as Jim Loudark, patriarch of the Loudark family. 2 roots extend from his mouth to the back of his head, pressing his ears back and pulling his lips into a crazed grin. Aside from the roots, he looks like he's dying. No, that's not exactly right. He looks like he's drying. His skin is wrinkled and seems to grip his bones like dried paper mache over a styrofoam skeleton. To my left, dwindling sunlight tries weakly to infiltrate the cave through its roughly oval entrance, allowing me just enough light to see my dim surroundings. My pack lies on the cave floor nearby, but there's no sign of my guns. Bringing my hands up to grab Jim's wrists, I struggle to free myself from his grip, but I'm too weak, and he's too strong. Stronger than any man his size and age has any right to be. Still, I try to free myself, pain-filled head whipping right and left as I take panicked stock of the cave. To my right, the uneven ground fades to darkness, but there's something over there in the darkness. Something wet and breathing. sounding like 100 asthmatic old men snoring softly in unison. Standing off behind Jim's right shoulder is the Laudark matriarch, Lauren. She looks slightly better than her husband, but the dry skin and the roots make her hard to look at, even in the dim light. I see no sign of Cyril or the brother Cyrus. I peer around, looking for the bear. As I do, I let go of Jim's wrist and reach one hand up to my skull, wincing as I touch the gashes in the side of my head. But the wince of pain quickly turns to panic as I feel something soft and organic there. Ignoring the pain, I run my fingers along the gashes. Then I dig in and rip out a chunk of the stuff. I scream out in pain, then look at what I've torn from my wound. It's moss. There's moss growing in my wound. As panic swirls in my mind like a hurricane, I rip at the moss, tearing it out, feeling hot blood pour down the side of my head.
Stop!
Jim says. He can't close his mouth to speak properly, so it comes out as a wordless shout. Lauren moves up and grips my wrist, slamming it back against the cave wall to make me stop tearing at my wound.
Yo, Kadu!
Lauren says. I try to yank my hand out of her grip, but she's as strong as her husband, and I can't get it to budge. I have no idea what she's trying to say to me, and I don't care. I can feel that I no longer have my python at my hip. It's probably back on the trail where the bear attacked me, but I need to get out of here. Something occludes the light at the tunnel entrance, and I look that way to see Cyril. She still has roots coming out of her mouth, and she carries a backpack I've never seen before. I stop fighting and watch her. Cyril stops nearby, at a wide place in the cave. She slings her pack down and opens it up, pulling out a camelback water bladder. She brings it over to her father, who turns his head up. Cyril dumps the bladder over his face, getting much of it in his mouth, while the rest of it goes streaming down his body. I watch in amazement as the man's dry, wrinkled skin seems to soak up the water like a sponge, taking a good 20 years off him. Cyril then retrieves a water bottle from the pack, my Nalgene, and gives it to her mother. Lauren takes it in her free hand and dumps it over her face. But since the Nalgene doesn't hold as much water as the camelback, the transformation isn't so drastic. Still, it's noticeable. Movement from the back of the cave catches my attention. It's the bear. The injuries I inflicted on it are still apparent, although there's no blood and the exposed flesh doesn't look right. There's plant matter growing in the wounds, much like the moss in my injuries. Cyril retrieves another water bottle from the pack and pours it over the bear. But it doesn't do anything. Not that I can tell in the limited light anyway. The roots snaking through the bear's fur still look dry, the leaves still brown. Cyril then takes the receptacles, puts them back in the pack, and then heads out of the cave again. The bear comes over, gets behind Jim, and stands on its hind legs. It puts its paws gently on the man's shoulders and stares over Jim's head at me.
What is this?
I ask, still feeling the blood seeping out of my head wound. No one answers, not with words. But I notice that one of the roots coming from Jim's mouth is shifting. The tip of the root suddenly appears, moving smoothly through the air, coming around Jim's head and heading toward me.
No!
I say, turning my head away.
No!
Jim stiffens, something like intelligence coming back into his eyes. The bear grunts behind him, pushing down on the man's shoulders as if to keep him in place. I start struggling again, trying to get free as the root extends toward my face, then continues toward the back of my head. I slap my one free hand over the back of my head, but a movement later, I feel a sharp pain as the root digs through my hand. Grunting in agony, I can do nothing but wait for the thing to invade me. Jim looks into my eyes, tears rolling down his cheeks, only to be absorbed by his skin.
Kill me,
he pleads. His words are a little strangled, thanks to the one root still going around the back of his head, but I hear him just fine. And then the root enters my neck, and I spasm. A moment later, it enters my brainstem, and I'm ripped to a hellish landscape that threatens to tear my mind from the tenuous stems of sanity that hold it in place. I'm still aware of my presence in the cave, of the hands pressing me to the wall, of the grip on my right wrist, and of the massive bear standing not 3 feet away. But I have to fight hard to keep that awareness, because some other force is invading my brain. I feel as though I'm some small part of a vast network of semi-sentient beings that reach under the surface of the earth, almost all the way to Elk Lake. Those beings are plants, I realize, but not plants as they are. Plants as they've come to be as a host for this thing. They are all separate individuals, these plants, but they're also part of a hive mind. And that alone is enough to cause potentially irreparable harm to my mind as I try to fathom all the parts. There's one predominant voice that runs through it all, but voice isn't quite the right word for it. Consciousness is more accurate, although it still misses the mark. Because this thing doesn't communicate with me in words, it uses images to communicate. And that's its purpose in invading my mind. It wants to tell me something. It promises me abundance in the form of endless crops, protection from predators, and shelter. It shows me images of all these things, and I see myself in them, speaking to a crowd of people as some kind of shaman or preacher. But these images are ancient in their details. In them, I'm wearing crude clothes fashioned of animal pelts, and the shelter I live in is a hut made from living trees formed into one simple room. I realize it sees itself as a god of sorts, and it wants me to proselytize for it. It needs to be worshipped. It needs people to care for it so its strength and power can grow. But it doesn't seem to understand the modern world, or that riches in the form of crops aren't the most important form of wealth. I realize it has been trapped up here in the mountains for centuries. Only now that it has been able to capture several humans and feed itself does it have the power to seek new worshippers. I wonder what it would do with more power, but that avenue seems to be closed to me. It wants an answer, and if I don't give it the one it wants, I know I will be fully invaded, becoming another of its slaves. Slaves who need constant care and attention just to stay alive. Slaves who can't venture far from their master without dying. There's no question I can't hide my true feelings from it, and my answer is a resounding no. But just as that simple concept is coming to the fore of my mind, something happens in the cave. It takes some effort to pull my attention back to reality, but as I do, I see Jim thrashing, and the bear trying to hold him still. Jim lets go of my shoulders, and my legs take my weight as I struggle to keep myself present in the cave, even though the thing in my mind is trying to stop me. My left hand is still pinned to the back of my neck by the root, and Lauren still has my right hand against the cave wall. But I soon feel the presence in my mind retreating, and I know it has to because it's losing control of Jim. He's fighting back. I take a huge breath as the root pulls out of my brainstem, allowing my full self to come back. But with it comes the pain of the gashes in the side of my head and of the small hole through my left hand and my neck. Fighting through the pain, I know I have to do something. The bear growls as it shoves Jim down to his knees. Now that the root is out of me, the move pulls it down with Jim. I see it immediately going for the back of his head so it can regain control of him. Lauren lets go of my right wrist and turns to help the bear. I know there's only one way I can help him. It's a long shot, but maybe it will help me too. I reach out and grab the root in my injured left hand, gripping it as hard as I can, keeping it from going back inside Jim's brain.
Fight it!
I shout at Jim just before the bear takes one huge paw off his shoulder and swipes at my left wrist. The claws slice through my flesh like sharpened knives through soft cheese, knocking my arm away and releasing the root. I stare down for a long moment at my left arm, certain I saw exposed bone before the wound filled with blood. I'm barely cognizant of Jim slipping away from the bear thanks to my distraction. He has one hand up, gripping the root that still has yet to re-enter his brain. He lunges at Lauren, tackling her to the ground. Rolling off Lauren, and still somehow holding the root in his hand, he lurches up. Stumbling toward the back of the cave, Jim reaches up and yanks the other root out of his neck. Meanwhile, the bear backhands me as it turns to go deal with Jim. I smack into the wall, the impact knocking my breath away before I come to rest on the cave floor. Stunned, I look toward Jim in time to see him run directly at a rock jutting from the wall.
He's shouting insanely, both hands holding the squirming roots as they work their way through his flesh so they can take control of him again. But apparently he'd rather die, because as he approaches the jutting rock, he leaps into the air and jerks his head forward like a professional soccer player going for a header. The sound of his skull smacking into the rock echoes through the cave, leaving no doubt in my mind that he's done what he set out to do. I see my pack nearby and crawl toward it, blood leaving my body at an alarming rate. I go directly for a side pocket on my pack, unzipping it and pulling out a black and orange can of jet boil fuel. A glance behind me reveals the bear, pawing at Jim's limp body. But Lauren, who is now standing, stares at me. I can almost see the communication pass from Lauren to the bear as the burly creature turns its eyes to me. Pulling myself up into a sitting position, I set the fuel canister in my lap and reach into a cargo pocket for a lighter. I always carry a lighter, matches, and a manual fire starter on me when I go into the woods. Fire can save your life. I find the lighter in my pocket as the bear lumbers toward me. My left hand is weak, so I have to do this with my right hand only. As I pull the lighter out, I fumble it, dropping the device to the rocky cave floor. Leaving it there, I grab the gas canister, using my teeth to pull off the plastic cap. Then I reverse the canister and slam its top into a nearby rocky outcropping. I can hear the gas hiss out of the broken valve. Setting the canister in my lap, I search for the lighter. The bear is closing in, and this time I think it means to kill me. I don't think I can take another hit from it. My fingers find the lighter. I bring it up, my thumb working it, a small flame sprouting from the tip. The gas spewing out of the canister ignites immediately. I drop the lighter and pick the flame-spewing canister up, thrusting it toward the bear as it arrives. The bear roars as the flames dance across its face, igniting the webwork of roots there. It shakes its head, turning away. I'm surprised as the flames continue to work their way over the bear's body, igniting the fur like it's a field of bone-dry grass. Afraid that the canister will blow up in my hand, I throw it at the retreating bear, immediately turning back and reaching into my pack for the tool I know is in there. Because now Lauren is coming at me, and I don't think her intentions are much better than the bear's. I pull my parang out, which is essentially a weighted and curved machete designed for chopping, and slide its sheath off as Lauren arrives. "Stay back!" I shout, bringing the weapon up to ward her off. A concussive boom sounds from farther in the cave, making me flinch and look that way. The canister exploded, and I can see that the bear is now rolling around, trying to put out the flames. Shifting my attention back to Lauren, I realize it's too late. She gets me around the neck before I can fend off her attack. For a moment, I think about slamming the parang into her, killing her. But I know it's not Lauren doing this. So I go for the next best thing, raising the blade and dragging it across the back of her head hard enough to sever the roots there. Lauren suddenly goes stiff, eyes wide and face blank as the thing inside her loses control momentarily. But I can see the roots morphing, sharpening where I severed them, getting ready to take control of her again.
"It won't let me live,"
she says before the roots can stretch her mouth wide again.
"Kill me, please."
Then her lips are stretched wide again, and she resumes choking me. Knowing I have no other choice, I slam the blade as hard as I can into the side of her neck. Blood pours down on me. She keeps choking me. I do it again. More blood. She doesn't let up. I cut into her neck 2 more times before hitting spinal cord, at which point she stops, hands going limp as she wavers and falls next to me. I get to my feet as quickly as I can, swaying and lightheaded as I stumble toward the bear. Its fur is completely gone, burned away, leaving only scorched skin. Its left forepaw is injured, presumably because of the fuel canister that exploded little more than a minute ago. Wasting no time, I come up behind the thing and swing the parang into the back of its already damaged skull. Dark, watery liquid spews out. It roars and swipes at me, sending me crashing into the wall again. But it's weak, and the blow to its head has made it weaker. This time, I straddle the bear's back and chop into its head and neck until it stops moving. Breathing hard, I look into the wound, barely able to see by the fading light outside. But what I can see is not normal. Instead of veins and tendons, there are tubers and roots inside the bear. The muscles are still there, but the meat looks dry and brittle, as if the roots have sucked up most of the moisture from them. The breathing sound coming from the back of the cave has increased. It has been there the whole time, but it faded into the background while I was fighting for my life. Now, I know I have to go investigate. But first I have to stop my arm from bleeding. I go to my pack and get my first aid kit out, along with a compact camping lantern. It takes me a few minutes to get my left arm wrapped in gauze. While I work, I glance up, expecting Cyril to come into the cave any minute. And maybe her brother too. I haven't seen him yet. Maybe the ranger I saw going into the lake is still alive, if you can call that living. Judging by what I saw when Cyril brought water back, I'm guessing he was going into the lake to soak up moisture. But no one comes into the cave, and nothing comes from the back other than that sound like 1,000 old men huffing like they're running a marathon. I gather my supplies, my last canister of fuel, my lighter, my lantern, and the parang, and I venture toward the back of the cave. As I come up next to the bear, I stop as I see a patch of fur remaining on its inner arm. Putting the parang down, I touch the fur, realizing why the bear caught on fire so swiftly. The fur doesn't feel like fur at all. It feels like bone-dry grass. I wonder how long it took for the organism to take over the bear's body like that, and I shudder to think it almost happened to me. Resuming my journey, I head toward the sound of huffing. I come to a drop-off, easing forward to look into the chasm before me. As I hold the lantern out and peer directly down, I glimpse a network of root systems a good 30 feet below me. But it's not just roots down there, I realize, kneeling to get a better look. There are odd protrusions coming up from the roots, like those strange thermal vents found on the ocean floor. Only these have flaps that rise and fall at the top as the organism breathes, if that's what it's doing. The roots are all tan, and the vents are the color of dry straw. I count dozens of them, and they must each be at least 2 feet tall and a foot in diameter. As I inspect these things, a wet gasp sounds from directly ahead of me. I jerk back, bringing the lantern up in my left hand. The light spills across the wall, directly across the drop-off from me, illuminating a young man, or at least pieces of a young man. Despite his deformation, I recognize his face from the pictures on social media. It's Cyrus Loudark. He's stuck to the cave wall with roots that penetrate his arms and legs so much that he doesn't even have hands or feet anymore. Smaller roots have invaded his skull and the other parts of his body. But unlike the others, he doesn't have any coming out of his mouth. He's different somehow. His breathing in unison with the vents below, eyes full of pain, mouth hanging open. He looks me in the face, huffing, pleading silently. Then his eyes dart down to the fuel canister in my left armpit. He's telling me what to do. He's begging me to do it. I nod at him once, putting the parang down, and grab the canister, setting it in front of me. Then I fish the lighter out of my pocket. Just like I did before, I remove the lid and bash the top of the canister into a pointy rock. Fuel spews out. I light the fuel with the lighter and then hold the flaming canister out over the drop-off. If I don't get this right, there's no telling what will happen. I time it, waiting until the vents close. I aim for one, and just as they open again, I drop the canister. It tumbles down, the flame changing its trajectory more than I anticipated. But as it spins, the spewing flame acts as a sort of rudder, bringing it back toward the vent as it tumbles. Then it falls directly into the vent a split second before all the lids close again. I move back from the ledge and pick up the parang. Moments later, the canister explodes. A massive fireball shoots up from below, much bigger than should have been possible from that little canister. I stumble back and trip, covering my face as the fireball licks across the ceiling. There's a flash of heat, and I cough from the smoke. But soon the danger is over. Getting to my feet again, I ease toward the edge, lantern still in hand. The first thing I look at is Cyrus. His eyes are still open, but they have lost their intensity. They're the blank eyes of a dead man. Plus, he's no longer breathing. I can't hear that huffing noise anymore. What I can hear is the crackle of a fire. I peer over the edge and see that what's left of the vents is still burning. The acrid smoke makes me cough more, and I back away from the ledge, turning to leave the cave. When I get outside, the sun is almost down.
The cave entrance is somewhat hidden behind some trees, but as I skirt them, I see Cyril lying face down on the ground, wearing the same pack she had on earlier. I rush over to her, yanking the pack off. It's heavy with water bottles and a camelback bladder, then turn her over to feel for a pulse. She's dead. That much is abundantly clear. But I pull those damn roots out of the back of her neck anyway. I try to yank them out of her mouth, but they don't want to come. They travel all the way down her throat, and they're probably inside her organs.
I pull her into my lap, crying even though I don't know this girl at all. I'm crying because I don't see Cyril's face. I see my young wife's face, a face I saw for the last time in a place much like this one, before she disappeared forever.
The motorized helicopter hoist brings me up to the hovering aircraft. A search and rescue worker grabs the harness and pulls me into the helicopter.
Is there anyone else?
He calls over the sound of the rotors. I shake my head.
Ranger Monroe?
I say,
Did he make it back okay? Yes, sir. He's the one who told us where to look.
I nod, thankful at least Monroe made it, and I look out the open door toward Elk Lake below. I've just spent a touch-and-go night on the ridge overlooking the lake, thinking that was the best possible spot for me to wait. By the time I went back into the cave and gathered my gear, it was fully dark out. I hiked back to the lake in pitch dark, using my compass and the map Hoover gave me to get back on the trail. I kept expecting someone or something to come out of the woods for me, whether it be another possessed bear or the ranger who disappeared into the lake, but nothing ever did. It was a small miracle I made it up to the ridge, considering how much blood I had lost. As the temperature dropped, I got into my sleeping bag, ate a protein bar, drank some water, and then passed out. When I awoke to the sound of helicopter rotors, it was already light out. Now, as I get situated in the helicopter, I glance out the door at the lake below. I'm hoping to see a body floating in the water, but I don't. Soon, the helicopter banks, and the lake is behind us. I wonder if that man was just going into the lake to replenish his body with moisture, or if he had some other purpose for going into that body of water. I picture him on the bottom of the lake, large roots sprouting from his body and sinking into the rich lake bed. I picture the roots digging through the soil, slowly heading up toward the cave, searching for more of their kind. After all, if there's one thing I know about destroying invasive weeds, it's that you have to destroy the root systems, or they'll keep coming back. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.